Have you ever met someone who moves through life as though nothing can touch them? While everyone else argues, reacts, and rushes to prove themselves, they remain still like a quiet lake untouched by the wind. They don't chase, they don't cling, they don't explain themselves to be understood. If you message them, they reply when they feel like it. If you distance yourself, they don't try to pull you back. They exist as if the world has no urgency, no demands, as if everything can be taken or left with the same gentle shrug. At first glance, you might think it's confidence, a kind of effortless ease, the charm of someone who doesn't need validation to breathe. But there's something deeper there, something harder to define, a kind of absence behind the calm, a quiet something that makes you wonder whether they are truly at peace or simply untouched. Their silence feels like a closed door, not a peaceful meadow. Their stillness feels like a pause held too long. You may find yourself asking, how do they do it? Why is it that while you overthink every message, every tone, every distance in a relationship, they simply remain unbothered? Where your heart races, theirs barely moves. Where you anticipate loss, they seem already practiced in letting go. They live as though nothing is ever truly theirs to begin with. Not friendships, not relationships, not love, not even moments of joy. Everything is temporary, and they treat it as such. But look closely. Look beneath the quiet. Nonchalance has two origins. One is strength, the other is survival. One says, I trust myself enough to not fear losing anyone. The other says, I have lost enough already, and I will not allow myself to feel that again. The difference is subtle, almost invisible, even to the person themselves. And yet, it shapes everything. Sometimes the calm is real. Other times, it is the last remaining shield held over a heart that learned, long ago, that caring, too, much is dangerous. Picture a child who once reached out for love and found none returning. A teenager who swallowed their pain because no one knew how to hold it. A young adult who discovered that the less they showed, the less the world could wound them. Over time, caring became a risk, and silence became protection. So now, when you see someone who seems untouched, unbothered, unshaken, pause. Ask not what they show, but what they have learned to hide. Because sometimes, the ones who care the least, it once cared the most. And this leads us to the question at the center of this entire exploration. Is this calm a sign of self-assurance, or the echo of emotional distance learned long ago? Have you ever noticed how some forms of silence begin long before a person ever becomes an adult? Before the calm, before the distance, before the quiet, expressionless gaze, there was a child. A small, soft-hearted child who once felt everything intensely. A child who cried loudly, laughed, without hesitation, reached out openly, and asked to be held without shame. But somewhere in that child's world, something shifted. Something taught them that their feelings were either too much or not enough. Maybe there was a parent who never knew how to listen, not out of cruelty, but out of their own unresolved storms. When the child cried, the parent didn't look up. When the child grew excited to share something, the parent remained distracted. Slowly, the child learned that emotions were not a bridge, they were an inconvenience. And the nervous system adapted, the heart began to fold inward. Or maybe the home was a battlefield of unpredictability, a household where doors slammed, voices clashed, and love came in brief, confusing fragments. In such an environment, the child learned something even more profound, that attachment can hurt, that love is unstable, and that to rely on someone is to be at their mercy. So the child did what the brain does to survive. It numbed feeling. It muted desire. It pressed the heart deeper into silence. Attachment theory calls this the dismissive avoidant adaptation. not a preference for distance, but a response to emotional inconsistency. Or perhaps the child simply cared too deeply, and that care was mocked. Tears met with "stop being weak." Joy met with "you're too much." Vulnerability met with laughter, or worse, indifference. And so the psyche learned a quiet, devastating lesson. If I don't care, I can't be hurt. The child stopped expressing. Not because the feelings were gone, but because expressing them came with a price. This is where nonchalance is born, not in adulthood, not in some sophisticated emotional philosophy, but in the soft, unprotected years where the world first teaches us what love costs. And over time, the adaptation becomes identity. The child grows, but the armor grows faster. By adolescence, they are already fluent in emotional silence. By early adulthood, they most to be people, no longer remember what it felt like to reach out without fear. They appear calm, self-contained, unaffected. But beneath the composure lies a history of battles unseen. So, when you encounter someone who seems untouched by love, conflict, or loss, remember that the ice did not form overnight. It began long ago in the small hands of a child who only wanted to be held without breaking. And now, that child walks the world in an adult body, protected, distant, and untouched, as we move toward how this armor appears in everyday relationships. Have you ever noticed how some people move through relationships as if nothing can truly touch them? They sit in the middle of conflict with a calm face, almost serene, while others break, tremble, plead, or over-explain. They don't raise their voice. They don't chase after someone who threatens to leave. They don't try to convince anyone of their worth. They simply remain quiet, composed, distant in a way that seems gentle rather than cold. You may look at them and think they are strong or indifferent or even enlightened, but this is not ease. This is training, because somewhere along the path to adulthood, the emotional silence that once defended them became the mask they now wear with grace. They learned, long ago, that showing pain only deepened it. So now, they don't argue when someone misunderstands them. They don't clarify when someone assumes wrong. They don't beg anyone to stay. Their heart is like a glass display case in a museum. You can see it clearly, but you cannot touch it. Everything about them is visible, yet nothing ever fully reachable. Imagine a relationship. One person expresses affection, longing, fear of losing them. The other sits still, listening, offering nods instead of vulnerability. It's not that they don't feel the closeness. They do. But the moment emotion approaches depth, something inside them tenses a subtle tightening of the chest, a quiet retreat of the meimenin back. Eyes. They withdraw, not dramatically, but gently, like someone stepping back into a shadow they know well. The other person feels the space widen. They start to wonder if they are asking for too much, loving too loudly, or consider a friendship. A misunderstanding happens. Instead of explaining, clarifying, repairing the nonchalant, one simply lets distance settle. Not out of punishment, but because conflict feels like drowning. Silence feels safer than the risk of being seen disappointed or hurt. So they step away, politely, quietly, leaving the other person questioning what they did wrong, when in truth, the retreat has nothing to do with blame, only memory. Psychology calls this avoidant bonding, the nervous system's instinct to pull away when closeness feels threatening. But to the outside world, it looks like peace. It looks like maturity. It looks like someone who is just not that emotional. And sometimes, even they believe it. They convince themselves they don't need anyone, that they are better alone, that love is optional, not oxygen. But the heart behind glass still beats. It still wants to be touched. It simply doesn't remember how to let the door open without shaking. And so, the question becomes, what happens to a person who lives behind emotional glass for too long? To answer that, we must look at what the mind does to protect itself and what it sacrifices in return. Have you ever wondered why some people shut down the moment emotions get close? Not with anger, not with dramatic withdrawal, but with a quiet, practiced stillness like a door closing without sound. It feels personal when you're on the other side of it, but the truth is, this reaction began long before you ever came into their life. It is not you they are shutting out. It is an old pain waking up in their nervous system. Psychology calls this the dismissive avoidant attachment style, but that name sounds colder than the reality. What it really means is that somewhere along the way, the person learned that emotional closeness is unsafe. The brain, always trying to protect, formed a rule. Do not need anyone, do not depend, do not reveal. To someone who grew up without emotional reliability, vulnerability feels like stepping onto cracking ice, so instead of stepping forward, they freeze. The nervous system is designed for survival, not connection. And when a child grows up in an environment where emotional needs are ignored, mocked, or inconsistently met, the brain adapts through emotional suppression. Neuroscience shows that the amygdala, the part of the brain that processes emotional threat, becomes more reactive in these individuals, while the prefrontal cortex learns to shut down emotional signals to stay safe. It is not that they do not feel, it is that they have learned to numb the feelings faster than they can surface. Polyvagal theory explains this even more clearly. When faced with emotional intimacy, instead of fight or flight, their body chooses the freeze response. The mind disconnects, the heart goes quiet. The body conserves energy by shutting the emotional system down. On the outside, this looks like calm. On the inside, it is the nervous system bracing for impact. So they adopt beliefs that sound like strength, but are actually survival instincts. Needing someone makes me weak. Feelings are dangerous. If I don't care, I can't be hurt. And the world praises them for it. They are called independent, unbothered, low maintenance, even mysterious. But beneath the surface lies a simple, aching truth. They are not afraid of love. They are afraid of what love has cost them before. Their emotional distance is not a rejection of others. It is a shield built to protect the most tender parts of themselves. Yet shields are heavy, and a heart kept behind armor beats differently, slower, quieter, lonelier. Which leads us into the shadowed part of this story. What is the cost of living untouched? What happens when protection becomes prison? That is where we go next. What happens when strength becomes isolation? When self-sufficiency, once a proud achievement, quietly turns into a cage? There comes a point when the armor you built to protect yourself stops being a shield and becomes the thing that keeps life from ever reaching you. You may not notice it at first. You may even take pride in it. You say you're fine being alone, that you don't rely on anyone, that you don't need reassurance or softness. And for a while, it feels powerful, like standing in the eye of your own storm, untouched. But the longer you live this way, the more the silence begins to echo. There's a strange loneliness in being the person who doesn't need anyone. It's not the loud kind that aches for company. It's the quiet kind that seeps into you like fog. You watch others share small vulnerabilities, a hand reaching across. The table, a late-night confession, a trembling truth, and something inside you stirs, but you don't move. You've trained yourself too well. You've mastered the art of emotional minimalism. You convince yourself that needing nothing means losing nothing. But beneath that calm surface, your nervous system still remembers the warmth it was denied. It still yearns for safety in another heartbeat. Psychologically, this is the paradox of avoidant attachment, a person who craves closeness yet fears it deeply. The brain treats intimacy as danger, triggering the same circuits that respond to threat. So you pull away not because you don't care, but because closeness feels like exposure. You build a life so controlled that even love must pass through filters of logic before it can be felt. But love cannot survive dissection. It must be lived. Imagine your heart as a castle built after a war. The walls are thick, the gates rarely opened. No one can hurt you anymore. But no one can enter either. Inside, it's quiet, unbearably so. You tell yourself you like it this way. You decorate the walls, keep everything clean, orderly, predictable. Yet, at night, when the world quiets, you feel the emptiness press against you, heavy and familiar. Because the truth is, even the strongest walls cannot keep out loneliness, they only keep in longing. This is the hidden cost of nonchalance. It gives you control, but it steals connection. It protects you from heartbreak, but it also protects you from love. And though you tell yourself you've chosen peace, what you've really chosen is distance. A distance so polite, it almost looks like strength. But society doesn't call it loneliness. It calls it confidence. It praises the unbothered. It teaches you that the less you feel, the more power you hold. And that illusion, that glorification of detachment, is where the story turns next. Have you noticed how the world quietly rewards those who appear like they don't care? The ones who don't text back too fast. The ones who walk away first. The ones who laugh things off, never show jealousy, never confess longing, never reveal how deeply they feel. Society romanticizes this emotional distance and calls it strength. We call it playing it cool. We call it not being desperate. We whisper to each other, care less, that's how you win. Somewhere along the way, being emotionally present became embarrassing. Wanting someone became a flaw. Admitting you were hurt became a weakness. And so, you learned to shrink your feelings into something small and quiet, something that wouldn't reveal too much. You took your heart, warm and unguarded, and you placed it behind a carefully crafted persona. A persona that says, I'm good, I don't need anyone. Culture amplifies this message in subtle ways. Music tells you not to get attached. Movies glorify the mysterious character who is cold and distant. Social media turns emotional. Detachment into a trend, a look, a tone, an aesthetic. People compete to see who can care less, who can detach first, who can appear more unshaken. And slowly, connection becomes a performance rather than a truth. But beneath this performance, something fragile suffers. Neuroscience has shown that emotional connection is not a luxury. It's survival. The brain is wired to bond. The nervous system regulates through closeness. The heart heals through being seen. When you starve yourself of these things, you don't become strong, you become numb. And numbness is not peace, it's just silence. The nonchalant persona appears confident on the outside, but internally it often stems from a simple, aching belief. If I don't show how much I care, I can't be rejected. It is fear dressed as poise, pain disguised as elegance, a shield that starts to look like identity. But here is the quiet tragedy. When you convince others that your heart is unreachable, they eventually stop trying to reach it. People mirror the distance you project. The world treats you as invulnerable because you taught it to. And suddenly, the thing you feared most, being alone, becomes the life you live by default. You begin to realize that winning by caring less is not a victory but a forfeiture. Because you didn't just protect your heart, you walled it in. And the longer you hold that pose, the more a silent question begins to appear in the quiet moments. What is the real cost of never letting yourself feel? To answer that, we now move into the emotional consequences, the loneliness that doesn't always look lonely. There is a loneliness that doesn't cry, doesn't collapse, doesn't announce itself. It lives quietly, in the soft spaces of your life. You feel it in the silence after a conversation ends a little too soon, in the way you sit on your bed at night, scrolling through your phone, not because you're looking for something, but because you're avoiding the stillness that waits for you when you stop. You tell yourself you're fine, you always do, and yet there is a heaviness that presses against your ribs, familiar and nameless. This loneliness does not look dramatic. It doesn't scream or ache with visible pain. Instead, it is a hum, constant, low, easy to ignore until the world grows quiet. It is the realization that no one truly knows you. Not the version you show, not the composed exterior, not the polite distance. They know your mask, but not your pulse. They know your shape, but not your warmth. You may go through your days accomplishing things, appearing confident, even admired. But connection is not built on admiration, it is built on being seen. And when you do not allow yourself to be seen, life becomes something you watch rather than something you feel. You begin to experience your own existence as though you are standing behind a glass wall, observing interactions, emotions, moments always close, but never touched by them. In psychology, this is the quiet aftermath of emotional avoidance. When your nervous system has spent years minimizing emotional risk, it also minimizes emotional reward. The same wall that keeps heartbreak out keeps tenderness from entering. The brain adapts to protect you, but the heart suffers the cost. And so, without meaning to, you become a witness to your own life rather than a participant in it. There are moments small, fleeting, when the longing breaks through. When you see two people laughing without restraint, or a child reaching for their parent with no hesitation, or a couple holding each other like the world is soft for them, and something inside you aches, not with envy, but with memory. A memory of a time when you believed love was safe. But the tragedy is not that you are alone, it is that you have become comfortable with it. You have convinced yourself that this is just who you are, someone who doesn't need anyone, someone who is better off this way, someone self-contained, unbothered, unbreakable. Yet every night, the quiet tells the truth. The walls worked, they protected you, they did their job, but now nothing can reach you. And the question becomes, how do you learn to open a heart that was taught to close? To explore that, we must turn gently toward the possibility of healing. Where do you begin when your heart has been quiet for so long? When emotion feels like a foreign language you once knew, but have not spoken in years. Healing doesn't start with grand confessions or sudden openness. It begins in the smallest of moments, the ones so subtle they barely look like change at all. It begins the moment you stop saying, "I don't care," and instead whisper, even privately, "Maybe I do." You start by noticing the feeling, not explaining it, not justifying it, simply naming it. Neuroscience shows that when you put words to an emotion, the amygdala, the alarm center of the brain softens. Fear becomes smaller when it is recognized. You say to yourself, "I feel disappointed," or "I feel lonely," or simply, "I feel something." And in that moment, you have already done something courageous. You have allowed yourself to feel without running from it. Then comes vulnerability, but not the dramatic kind. You don't need to bare your soul all at once. You start by letting someone in just 1 inch, responding honestly when someone asks how you are, admitting when something hurt you, telling a friend, "I missed you," even if your voice shakes. Vulnerability is not a single act, it is a slow thaw. The heart unfreezes in degrees, not leaps. Safe relationships matter here, not perfect ones, but consistent ones. People who show up, people who don't rush your pace, people who understand pauses, silence, and slow trust. You learn to lean just a little to let someone hold one corner of your weight. And when the old fear rises, the fear, that closeness will collapse. You breathe, you stay. You remind yourself that discomfort is not danger. That wanting connection is not weakness. That disappointment will not destroy you like it once did. Because healing is not about becoming emotionally wide open. It is about becoming emotionally accessible. It is about letting your nonchalance transform from avoidance into grounded calm. There is a difference between being unbothered because you don't feel and being steady because you've learned to feel without drowning. You do not have to tear down the walls you built. You only have to open a door in them. Slowly, you learn that the heart does not break every time it opens. Sometimes it expands. Sometimes it breathes. Sometimes it remembers what it was made for all along. And this leads us to the quiet truth, waiting at the end of this journey, that real strength is not found in staying untouched, but in letting life touch you without losing yourself. What if the calories' real strength was never in the silence? What if the real courage was never in the distance you learned to maintain? We grow up believing that the safest way to live is with our hearts behind glass, protected, untouched, unreachable. But there comes a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when you begin to feel the faint, familiar pull of longing. Not for drama or intensity or grand declarations, but for warmth, for closeness, for life to be something you feel, not just observe. You start to realize that being unbothered was never the victory, it was the armor. The goal was never to feel nothing. It was to become someone who can feel without being destroyed by the feeling, someone who can care and still remain whole, someone who can love and still remain themselves. This is what true resilience looks like, not the absence of vulnerability, but the ability to hold it without running. Imagine for a moment that same child we began with, the one who learned to quiet their heart, to survive. Years have passed. They are older now, wiser, and though their mask has kept them safe, it has also kept the world at a distance. Now, imagine that child, now you, placing one hand on that glass barrier. Not smashing it, not tearing it apart, simply touching it, acknowledging what lies behind it. That is where healing begins, not in grand emotional release, but in gentle recognition. To let life touch you again is not to undo everything you've learned. It is to understand that the lessons that once protected you no longer need to lead you. The body remembers old pain, yes, but it can also learn new safety. The heart remembers withdrawal, yes, but it can also remember warmth. It takes bravery to say, I want to feel again. I want to let someone in. I want to live fully, even if it means hurting sometimes. There is no love without risk, no connection without exposure, no belonging without the possibility of loss. But there is also no meaning without opening yourself to the world. So you choose slowly, gently, deliberately, to be touched, to be moved, to be human. Because the real strength was never in becoming unbreakable. The real strength is in knowing you may break and opening your heart anyway. And in that choice, something remarkable happens. Life begins to feel warm again,